Ooh, she spoke. We're
So
recording.
intense, but it's so intense.
Hello, everyone. Again, it's so good to see everyone's beautiful faces. Clew, thank you so much for moderating this space for us. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Love to have you back at Dallas Theater Center. Thank you. So I'm going to dip away and Clew will get started. Okay.
Thanks, Mercedes. Welcome everyone to our panel on LGBTQ+. Is there true representation on stage? My name's Clew, and I'll just be here roundtabling with this glorious group of panelists. My pronouns are they, them, or he, him, or anything with positive intent. I'm a queer, non-binary Asian artist local to Dallas. I'd love to go around introducing our panelists, but to start, I really want to take this time to acknowledge the land that we're on. We are currently on the unceded lands of the Caddo and Kickapoo and the Tawakoni. I'd like to point to the 1841 Battle of Village Creek that was on the present-day border of Fort Worth and Arlington. This is one of the final acts of removal of Native American peoples from North Texas. One of the Caddoan tribes, which was called Tejas by the Spanish, is the origin for the name Texas that we still have. Indigenous people are still here in the earth, in our stories, and in our communities. And I encourage you to take time to invest in those learnings. With that said, I'd love to go around and I'll just kind of start and go in a circle on my screen. If you wouldn't mind saying your name, your pronouns, and what you do. And I'll start with DR.
Hi, my name is Dr. Hanson. Pronouns are he, him. I'm a white Jewish gender fuck artist and activist based in Dallas. What I do what needs to be done. I live that gig life right now, so I have a lot of privilege and luxury to kind of follow my heart where I need to go, and also follow other people's hearts where they want to go as an ally and a friend and whatever needs to happen. So that's me in a nutshell.
Awesome, thanks, DR. Zander, up next.
My name is Zander Pryor. I use he, him pronouns. I'm a queer trans guy, and I don't really do anything because I am a student. I am a senior in high school, about 2 weeks away from graduating.
Congratulations, Zander, you're so close. Pearl.
Hi, I'm Pearl Rhein. Pronouns are she, her. I'm on Lenape land. That's New York. I live in Queens, outside of Manhattan. I'm a cis bi lady, actor, musician, composer, and writer. And I know the Dallas theater family from playing Jo in Little Women at the end of the previous season. I'm really excited to be here.
Yay, glad to have you back, Pearl. Sky.
Hi, I'm Sky Williams. I go by she, her pronouns. I am a cis lesbian actor, singer, performer, model, getting into director, uh, artist here in DFW, and I'm so excited to be here.
Thank you, Sky, for bringing your amazing septum piercing into space with us today. Jonathan, hello.
Hi, everybody. My name is Jonathan Norton. I am a cis, gay, African-American theater artist here in Dallas, Texas. Grew up in Pleasant Grove, and I am the playwright in residence at Dallas Theater Center.
Woo! An amazing playwright, too. Can't wait to see what else we have in store in the coming seasons. And thanks again, Mercedes, for bringing me on today, and all of us here. We love you. I'd love to start this discussion thinking about the ways in which our identities as, queer, trans, non-heteronormative people affects and shapes our work. So if anybody has thoughts on ways that you have navigated those spaces, and perhaps the ways that the work has helped or, been hindered or acted as a hindrance as you've moved in these spaces with all the full facets of your identity. I see a hand up from Zander, so we'll start there.
So I have essentially established a sort of typecast thing, and so it's been both very much a help and a hindrance. I have been fortunate enough to do a lot of professional work in, my teenage years but all of that professional work has been, I am a trans guy and theaters needed a trans guy for whatever particular show. And so, I got these, amazing opportunities, but it also essentially, it forced me to take on a role as kind of a activist as a trans person, because I suddenly became more visible as, a trans person, and, was someone that, now people direct questions a lot to me and a lot to my mom, very interestingly, because she was kind of my social media presence for a while. And it's also made it harder for me to get roles, as like cis male roles, because everyone thinks of me as just trans, and so I'm, the first person that they call when they're looking for, a trans guy or a trans masculine person. But when it comes to just a teenage male role, I found that a lot of directors are less likely to consider me because they don't think of me as a guy. They think of me as a trans guy, and they don't see that. So it's both really kind of helped and hindered my career in that sense. I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, that makes total sense. And I'm hearing that it sounds like you've gotten the chance to play some amazingly authentic roles. At the same time, I want to uplift that it feels like I'm hearing that there have been facets of it that have felt like you being tokenized for a specific part of your identity. And I do hope that, you and all of us will be able to kind of enter spaces being seen for more than just the one thing that, like, a casting director or director needs. So, does anybody else have thoughts on that question? Sky.
Um, I think my journey is a little, let me know if you guys can't hear me. This is a new microphone. I think for me, my journey is a little bit interesting because I am recently out. And so I've had, it's been a journey. You come out the closet and then the pandemic hits and it's like, okay, go back inside. That's a whole thing. For me, it's been interesting because I have gotten roles just as, being a token as a Black woman, being a tall Black woman, being a singing tall Black woman. That I'm already pigeonholed. But I've been very fortunate to get opportunities where it's not just about that. I think that's very fortunate, and I think that is not, it is not lost on me how rare that is. But I will say, uh, to Xander's point, when I did come out and when it started to be a lot more publicly known, uh, there was a very interesting kind of tokenism, and there was kind of people choosing to talk to me about more of like, hey, our theater has already worked with you, and we noticed that, with, you know, Black rights, or, when theaters started to notice that they weren't being very representative of BIPOC people or LGBTQ people. And then they were like, well, Sky's worked with us before and she's gay. So it was kind of like they were kind of grandfathering me into their sort of like rights. Like, we're not too bad because like we work with guys. I'm like, yeah, but you didn't know I was gay. And they're like, yeah, but now you are. So sometimes it's more, hey, can you tell us what to do?
Mhm.
Or it's, hey, you had a pretty good experience here, right? So we're not that bad, which is very, very interesting. So it's not so much that I've been getting roles, so much as I've been getting like, I'm the Black friend that people brag about when they're trying to prove that they're not racist. Or people want to talk to me about activism. What can we do? We need to talk to you about it. And it's like, yeah, great. I would love to be a voice here, but like I said before, my journey is not the same as everybody else. I'm like, you need to talk to people that you haven't worked with. You need to talk to people that you didn't assume that they were straight. And I will say I am a little bit privileged in being a femme woman. I don't know, the septum piercing probably gives it away a little bit more now. They're like, oh, okay. she's got spice in her. But I think, uh, yeah, I think it's more people look to me to prove their own activism now that I'm out, whereas before, I was just seen as just another female Black actress.
Mm.
But I do have people. It's interesting because I have been getting offered work when people are like, "Oh, we're looking to more works written by queer BIPOCs, and you're a queer BIPOC, and we've worked with you before." So it's kind of like I said before. I'm interested to hear what everybody else has to say, just because my journey has been so different than what I've heard from my friends. So I don't know if that helps.
Different and still valid. So yeah.
Can I just chime in a little like left field, just because of the two things that Xander and Sky have shared? Anyone that's watching this, Google before you ask somebody about their identity and their journey, y'all. Like, it's not our place to educate you. So go and Google a little bit and then talk to us about what you've learned and ask questions from there. It's just, I'm hearing it and I feel like this is something that we can all affirm in our own journey. And I get it that people want to learn, but it's not our responsibility. And many of us are very happy to do it in a moment, but just Google, y'all. We have this thing called Google. It's amazing. Go do it and then share what you learn with us, and then we can have those conversations and learn from each other. That's the goal, I think. So kind of left field, sorry.
No, love that DR. Yeah, I was also hearing in both of the things Xander and Sky mentioned that it seems like it's, you know, implicit upon queer and trans people to act in theater spaces, not only as performers, but also as advocates and activists, and
And educate.
sometimes maybe paid to be, kind of like doing emotional labor for these folks that, genuinely want to know, but, might not have done the research themselves. So, um, there's maybe an assumption that the theater industry is welcoming of LGBTQ plus folks. Would y'all say that this has been, the case for you, or what does that journey look like for y'all?
I think it's a lot easier when you are cis, and you present your front is very cis, hetero, normal.
Mm,
That's very, very easy. I mean, I can walk into a theater that doesn't know me very well and they'd be like, "Oh, okay, yeah, that's great." And then later on, I mean, I can do a full show with them and them not know that I'm a lesbian, unless I'm just kind of like, "My wife is coming," or something like that. And then they're
right.
like, "Hmm." But then I'm like, "Yeah, I already signed I'm gonna get paid." Um, so I think I'm interested to see what Xander is
Yeah.
going to say.
Xander, what you got?
So what I will say is that like the people in theater are quite welcoming, like I first had my pronouns recognized and acknowledged in a show, like I would say that they're definitely like the people in theater spaces tend to be generally more sort of just on board with trans people. However, I think that it's kind of a double-edged sword in that because we assume that theater is a welcoming space, sometimes I think they don't feel like they need to do the work. Like once when, so I initially came out as non-binary and I lived for about a year as non-binary before eventually identifying as just kind of a gender non-conforming trans man. And so when I was, cast to play this non-binary role, they had no gender neutral bathrooms. Like I remember, I was like, introducing myself with they, them pronouns. And then they were just like, yeah, downstairs is the male and female bathrooms, and you just take your pick. And like there's just a lot of that in my experience of the facilities not necessarily being accommodating of trans people. Like they assume because they are friendly that they don't need to make accommodations and they don't think about accessibility. And it's just very clear that they don't have trans people on their staffs, that like I was like kind of the first trans person that, was working with them. And so, they hadn't thought about many things, and so that's been my experience.
Pearl?
Yeah, I want to build on that point that like, because there's a certain amount of inclusivity and progressiveness in the theater industry, it as an industry is really good at like leaning back on that and being like, we did it, we're done. And and there's actually like that inclusivity really stops. And I have a similar double-edged sword experience with theater, because when I was a kid, I grew up in a really conservative, really homophobic culture and family. And it was doing community theater was when I met my first non-religious people, my first queer people, and really started to plant those seeds of like, oh, these don't seem like monsters. That when I then started questioning my sexuality as a young teenager, those seeds were already planted, so I could be like, maybe I'm not a monster. So in a way, I really credit theater with like saving me from a lot more trauma at that point. But also, like, I do kind of big commercial musical theater sometimes, and a lot of my friends do, and I go and see like Broadway musical theater, and it is one of the most regressive forms of entertainment. And you can be sitting watching a musical, and the humor is coming from this place of homophobia, transphobia, misogyny, fat phobia. Like it's like a sitcom from the 90s with how hateful it is of difference. And I feel like just bridging between like, come on, we came from this place of transgressiveness, let's keep pushing and not just stop where we've got like a bunch of cis gay men and like not a lot of other forms of gender and sexuality are like, they may be allowed, but like not celebrated in the front facing, like the thing the audience sees doesn't look queer and trans.
Yeah, that's so real. I think that there's like a direct connection between maybe the kinds of misogyny and femphobia and internalized homophobia and transphobia that exists like within our community that perhaps are directly like related to the kinds of systems of oppression that we see in every other level in like our theatrical and political spaces. And so kind of straddling the worlds of like being in those spaces, but then also like to Pearl's point, feeling like, oh, I'm encountering like messaging that's coming across from me that, is still somehow like not for me. So it's also been my experience that in this white American theater system that we live in, that like it is inherently quite gendered. If I'm thinking about most casting notices that I've ever seen, being geared towards a role that is explicitly or coded as for cis men or cis women, and kind of as someone whose gender expression doesn't lie at either pole of that spectrum, at times feeling like, oh, I don't know where I'm at. But have y'all had views on that as well in terms of kind of the root of gendered casting within what we're in? Yeah.
I'm so sorry to keep talking. But I know like there was one show where I was cast as a trans guy, and the part was listed as a female part. And so it wasn't a show about like, it was a very kind of minor, role. Like it wasn't about like him coming out. Like he had already come out at the beginning of the show and was using his name and pronouns, and yet the casting notice was his dead name. And in the script, he was like all the characters were using he, him pronouns for him, but like all the dialogue was titled under like the his dead name, and all the stage directions were, using like she, her pronouns. And it was, I remember it was really perplexing. Like reading, I was just like, because there was no argument that you could make, because it wasn't, like he was in the process of transition or coming out. He had come out. And, and like I remember researching the play, when I auditioned, and when it was playing in New York, I don't remember, like, I think it may have been off Broadway. I'm not sure. But, it was a cis woman playing the part, and I remember like reading this like interview with her, where she was talking about like she had an understanding of transgender identity, and like was talking about how, like she'd done like this research. And I was like, how is it that like, like we can pay her to, do all this research on transgender men and, transgender male existence and to gain an understanding, but you couldn't just, hire trans men. And so I definitely notice that a lot, that like, like even roles that are written ambiguously, tend to end up being, listed as male or female, and I don't think gender nonconformity is really celebrated or very much accepted in theater. Like I have a section in my closet that is just for auditions because I can't go to auditions looking the way I usually want to because I tend to dress more androgynously, and so I need to, but, if I want to get cast in anything, I have to dress like someone who is not me. And I think that's the case that a lot of non-binary people feel.
Truth. I'm so sorry that's been your experiences with that too. Jonathan, I saw your hand.
Sure. I have so much that keeps bubbling up over the course of the conversation. But the first thing I just want to say is I've been sitting here the entire time and I'm thinking to myself, oh crap! Like, did I give my pronouns at the top? Like, I seriously cannot remember, and I'm sitting here like, wait, did I give my pronouns? He, him, his. I just want to say that. I've been thinking that the entire time. But I feel like to Xander's point, and also to the point that Pearl was making earlier, I think one of the place where I'm living right now, and the thing that I've been dealing with and struggling with is the control that we have um, as, as queer people to tell our own stories, and the agency that we have to do that, as well as you asked a question earlier about that oftentimes the theater is viewed as a very welcoming or embracing place, and obviously as Sandra said earlier, like feels like within the theater community and the people that work within the community, oftentimes it is, but like we still deal with the issues of how much authenticity, how much truth can we share in our stories for audiences that likely do not share our same experience, and that we're told would probably be uncomfortable with these stories. Yet they're coming to theater made by queer people. So it's just this really uncomfortable space that I've been living in for a while, and I just continually asking myself those questions and figuring out how to, as a theater maker, how to create my own sense of integrity, right, and fearlessness. But yeah, it goes back to that thing you were saying earlier about like, systems of oppression, and how easily we can fall into them, even when we're in a system that we or a program, not a program, but in a community or a craft that we feel like has always been taught is so incredibly embracing and welcoming. How do you reconcile those two?
Yeah, that makes me think about like the fact that like white supremacist structures and frankly like capitalism structures like often will pit minorities or marginalized groups like against each other as if there's only enough room for you know one special egg or something. Um, and I'm wondering if there have been ways that this has been evidenced to you in the work. And the flip side of that question would be, what are ways that um, having encountered these kinds of situations, you know, do you wish or do you feel like you were visible slash do you wish you could have been more visible or were there things that could have been better? How do we move the needle in a way to be able to kind of more authentically, express ourselves without having to be under any kind of confines like that? Yeah.
This might not be answering your question. I might be here just to go rogue. That might be the gender fucking me. So, kind of just going off a little bit of Jonathan, I think this may be able to, the smarter people in the room can connect the dots. But Jonathan said something about the integrity of artists and how we do that as queer LGBTQ plus people. And I just couldn't help but think that so often in those situations, it's either integrity or get a paid job. And it's really problematic that the nature of our business is so, and especially as performers specifically, is the idea that we sometimes feel like we have to do anything and everything to get that job. The fact that Zander doesn't feel comfortable going in his whatever wear, that breaks my heart. That's one reason why I'm not doing a lot of theater right now, to be honest with you all. Like, I'm tired of the bullshit. Like, I don't want to have to come in presenting masks to play a role. Maybe I just want to wear a dress. Why does my dress take away from my acting ability, my talent? Why can't you all see behind that or through that or be included? It's, I don't know. The needle may have been moving, but we've got so much unconscious bias in every individual in that room. Every room has unconscious bias, and if they're not doing the work, we're going to get these microaggressions. I was at a community conversation with a leader in Dallas of a theater company, and he said, "Oh, I just had a conversation with your buddy," and I was like, "My buddy?" I was like, "Oh, my husband?" And he's like, "Yeah, your buddy." And I was like, or he said maybe best friend. And then I was like, my husband, well, he's also your best friend, right? And I was like, whoa. And I was just so, like, I didn't know what to do because, again, this guy runs a theater. And I didn't want to have to sit there and be like, hey, buddy, hey, buddy, like, fuck you. Like, that is my husband. And I told you that, and you should recognize that. But his unconscious bias, his uncomfortability with my relationship with another man was evident in that moment. And he's creating theater in Dallas. What am I going to do with that? Okay, sorry, thank you. That's my TED Talk.
That sucks. That sucks. um, mm, wow. Yeah, we've got a lot of like the theater industrial complex here has so much work to do in terms of like dismantling these unconscious biases, right? Um, I had a question, especially since Xander, you're in high school right now, but thinking, and this is absolutely a question for everybody in the room, but for friends and family and teachers in our communities, like what are ways that we can affirm and support and encourage and uplift our LGBTQ, our queer and trans youth? Like, I'm thinking about this as the Texas House has scheduled a floor debate for a bill that would limit transgender students' ability to participate in team sports, and as Tennessee, within the past week has signed into law an anti-trans bathroom bill. And these are signals like I'm thinking about what would the me from a decade plus ago have done, in school if I had this blossoming part of my identity and expression that was dying to come out, but was being on all sides pressured or being put back in.
the number one thing that I can say, like off the top of my head, is don't put the onus on students to educate. Like I especially, because I was the first person to come out. Like, I was the only person out at my middle school. So like when like I encountered like a homophobic teacher, like I was the like, I had to debate my right to exist with a teacher who had, control over my grades and things like that, and I had to learn how to explain my identity to make it palatable to cisgender people and heterosexual people, so that I wouldn't be putting myself in danger, and the number one best thing people have done for me is to, step ahead. Like, it is like, people are so much more willing to listen to my mom when she corrects them on my pronouns than if I correct them on my pronouns, like, and being consistent, like I really, really appreciate it when it's a practice for everyone to share their pronouns. Because when it was first getting started, there was a lot of, we all have to share our pronouns because there's a binary trans person in our midst. And it was always just a little funny to me because I was like, it's like, I don't use a set of pronouns that you're not used to seeing, but because there's a transgender in our midst, we all have to go around saying, our, so making that standard, making it a practice that, we don't wait for the first transgender person to show up, that, and this is a very school specific one. But I think being cognizant of the fact that people's identities may not align with their documentation, that their IDs, that, they so I go to Booker T. Washington, High School for the Performing and Visual Arts. And I'll preface by saying I absolutely love it there, and it's been a godsend for me. And so I'm in the theater conservatory, and so we always do showcase. And so we have to make, a resume for like all of the colleges that, we're, sending our thing to. And I thankfully have been fortunate enough to get my name legally changed. But for a lot of trans people, that's not possible. And so for a lot of trans people, they've had to just, like put their dead name on their resume and then put their chosen name in quotes, and it's not the fault of the school, like it's not them being, intentionally transphobic. The issue is that, especially when it comes to colleges, they're going to have to apply with their dead name, and so they don't want to put those people at a disadvantage, and so just always asking for names and pronouns is so helpful, and just not assuming that you're going to know looking at their documentation, because the fact of the matter is that it's not a very accessible practice, like it's expensive. It's expensive, like both in like the literal sense and also in the fact that, it took like 3 court hearing dates, where like, so like, my like, and both of my parents had to show up, so like couldn't go to a job, so like it's, even if it doesn't cost money, it's still time, that they could not, and if they were working, they did not have the means to take off time to go, stand with me in court to, just talk about whether I deserve to, get my name changed or not, And so anticipate it and assume that there's a trans kid in your midst. Maybe they're not out, but just assume that and don't wait. Because a lot of people will make, because the thing about, queer identity that's, both like a blessing and a curse is that, it's not like being a person of color, because someone can tell most of the time that you're a person of color by looking at you. And so for some LGBT people, it's that way. And for some people, it's not. And some people don't make their spaces or classrooms accommodating for LGBT people until they find out that you're LGBT and, forcing you to kind of out yourself if you want them to kind of accommodate for your needs. And so I say assume that, you have a trans person in your midst. Assume, you have, and don't put the onus on people who, are, whose brains are still developing. Like, I'm a teenager. I should be allowed to be dumb and make mistakes, but I feel like I can't because I worry that I will be misrepresenting my community if I do so. Like don't make me be the educator in this relationship. Like, I have homework. I have AP tests. Like, I don't want to have to, do your research for you. I have my own projects.
To that end, Zander, I was going to ask you to describe dead names for people that might not be here, but now, you know what? Maybe I could do that for you. I don't.
Well, thank you. I'd appreciate that.
So from my understanding, a dead name is a trans person's given name or birth name, and that's not how they identify. So we've been hearing that phrase a lot. I just wanted to make sure that people listening and watching know what that means. So I'm pretty confident, Zander, that's your chosen name.
Yes, it is.
Zander has a dead name, and it's pretty understood not to refer to Zander with that name. So that's what a dead name is. See, a trans person didn't have to educate. That's what allyship's all about, folks.
Yes. Thank y'all both for talking on that. I've heard Xander and Sky kind of talk about how this has impacted them in different ways, but I'm interested in kind of if we can talk about the pros and cons and quotes, if you will, of being out and sharing your authentic self in these spaces. So writing rooms, audition spaces and rehearsals. Dr. Jonathan, Pearl, if y'all have any thoughts on kind of being out in theater and if it has opened or made any doors harder to open. Pearl.
I've had a mostly positive experience, and that is coming from the privilege of being cis, of being thin and able-bodied and white. And so I'm real palatable queer for a lot of people. I'm bi, I've got a wonderful cis husband, so I benefit from a lot of perceived straight privilege, which is the other side of the coin of bi erasure, so it's not always great, but that's totally my reality. So for me, very positive, and I can almost, what I feel like sometimes is I get, if I'm the token, I feel like you guys got to push harder. And I'm not saying I'm not queer enough. Like we bis like to carry that stone around. I'm queer enough for everybody, but we're not a monolith, and I am more privileged than a lot of queers. And so when I'm the only queer at the table, I feel like I'm really happy to be out and loud and talk about it, because I'm not risking a ton. I live in New York. Like it's a very easy place to be queer. So I just hope when I'm the only one at the table, I really hope that I'm able to push open some doors and bring in some more people. So for me, outness is really positive, but that's with all that like New York privilege that I'm bringing with it.
Thanks, Pearl, for using your voice in that way. That's really awesome. I'd love to come back around later to the topic of bi erasure. So as not to put you too much on the spot later, just know that I might revisit that. Jonathan, Dr., anything I'm definitely interested as our resident writer in the room and for DTC.
Similar to Pearl, my experience has been like largely positive, but I also think it's because I don't know if it's partially me kind of like trying to reverse engineer positive outcomes for myself or whatever by like I suppose it would be safe to say that growing up as I was and even before I actually came out uh, kind of self-selecting or identifying or putting myself in environments where I felt that I would be safe as a queer person, even though at the time I had not come out or not fully identified even in my mind in that way. And like the story that immediately pops to mind, I remember in junior high school, we went to one of our classes went to visit Booker T for a dance concert one day at lunch. And of course, we were all excited, like after visiting, because like this is, I don't know, I think it's a lot different. No, it's kind of still somewhat the same, but kids hanging out like at lunch, like in the hallways. It was just like this whole world was so exciting and so thrilling to all of us. The dancers and just all amazing. And so I remember the next day, everyone was really excited about going to Booker T. And me and a classmate were talking about, oh, we're going to go to Booker T, we're going to audition. And then my best friend in middle school at the time came back the next day and told me that, well, my parents said I couldn't go to Booker T because that's where all the faggots go. Like literally to my face, right? And of course, in that moment, my first response was, in my mind, I'm like, that's exactly where I need to be. Oh my God, I have to go like that. And like going to school in New York City and like every so many experiences, like trying to like reverse engineer safety for myself. If that sounds weird saying it now. But yeah, I think for me, it's been largely positive. But I also think it's probably because I tend to be, I guess, really careful. I've learned to be really careful with people because I feel like I'm the elder statesman of the group, and so I came up in a generation where I think things were just beginning to open up, but there also came a lot of danger with that. So there's always been this part of me that's been very careful and selective, and I guess for self-preservation in terms of how of who I trust myself with in certain environments and situations.
Jonathan, I think we might be in the same age group, so you're not alone, my friend. I'm on your age, but I think I'm there with you.
Okay.
I think it's similarly, like I've had pretty positive experiences. My only negative is the fact that to me, being out in my authentic self is so paramount that I don't think that's why I'm a good actor. I don't want to be something that I'm not. I've struggled so hard as growing up in evangelical Christian country.
Wow.
Like, I had to fight so hard for my identity and who I am. The idea of putting someone else's on, even if it's my job as an actor, even if it's something else, I struggle with that at times because I feel like there's I'm kind of reverting back to the childhood. And like every part that I play is like unfortunately super queer, which is great, like whatever. That's not true. But I guess I'm saying that like for me and my identity and my experience has been very positive. But I personally, as an artist, my journey has been very difficult in terms of trying to wrestle with that and reconcile that idea that it's okay to play a straight person on stage. That's not me rejecting all the work that I've done as a queer person. It's just a little bit harder for me personally to get to that point. Love and put so much effort into who I am and how I present myself on a daily basis.
Mm.
Stop that just seems like almost like maybe I don't want to be that. So I don't know.
Yeah, I think for me, I wonder if I had known or seen represented in media more out Asian actors or Asian actors, period, if I would have been more led to believe that this was, a career that I would be able to make a living in. And so I think that there is uh, such an importance in kind of just the advocacy that we do as like out queer and trans people, just existing for people who haven't yet found their voice. Yeah, Xander.
This is just a quick little thing, but like what you said kind of sparked something in me because like I had a couple of years where I knew I was trans, but I was like I can't ever transition. I can't ever come out because I would have to give up theater, and theater is, what I loved. Like when I remember, you know, it was the year I met Jonathan. I remember being in like playwriting class and like telling them all like I wrote this whole like like monologue about my dysphoria and like in the ways in which I was like struggling, and but I was still living as female, and like I I knew I that like I remember like as soon as like I came out to myself, I was like, well, this is great that I've come to this realization of my identity, but no one can ever know. Like I can't do this because I can't give up theater. I can't give up acting. And so I just wanted to completely second your point that, if there had been more, representation of, trans people, existing and growing old and, being in this industry that I loved, I wouldn't have had that initial reaction to realizing I was trans.
Mm, yeah, we deserve to be happy. We deserve to be whole. So mm, I believe that all of us here, you know, believe that and deserve those things.